Good evening, friends. Once again, welcome to each one of you in this GST refresher course, where we are discussing GST law, basic to practical approach. We have designed this in the 6 sessions, and today in day 3, we are going to cover place of supply, including exempt, composite, or mixed supply, by our eminent expert, C. Anuj Kakkar ji. Anuj ji, welcome to you on this Team CASA platform.
Thank you, Sumit. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
As we all know, we have covered in day 1 scope of supply, day 2 time and value of supply, and day 3 we are going to discuss place of supply. So this is very much very important session in this series. And before I invite our friend, our speaker, I would like to brief about him. Mr. Anuj Kakkar ji, by profession chartered accountant and qualified in November 2010. He has also qualified law graduate, LLB degree, worked with the law firm and consulting firm in Delhi and Mumbai. He has started his practice in 2019, 3 years back. Primarily, he is working in direct tax and export-import and having a vast experience in the field of indirect tax. So we will definitely learn a lot regarding the topic of the today. So now I invite Anuj ji to take up the deliberation. I hope all participants have received earlier 2 sessions recording as well as presentation in the description box. And today recording will also be shared in due course. And if you have any query, you can post in the chat box. And in last, we will open the forum for a discussion. So over to you, Anuj ji.
Thank you, Sumit. And I'd like to welcome everyone and thank them for attending today's session. And thank you, Team CASA, for this wonderful platform. I think it's very important. The 1st of July, we all completed 5 years since GST has come, and there have been so many changes. Basic law, we all are aware, but with so many advanced rulings and so many cases, positions have evolved. हम लोग को better understanding भी आया है, and at the same time, it has become important कि हम उसको refresh करें, because there will be some of the new legal positions. So while the provisions are the same, but every time आप मिलते हैं किसी को एक GST anniversary के बाद we'll have something new which we can all deliberate as a group. So I'll just turn on the PPT. Just give me 1 second.
शिवाजी, आपको मेल मिली होगी आपकी रजिस्टर्ड आईडी पर, आप चेक कर लीजिएगा. रिकॉर्डिंग एंड प्रेजेंटेशन बोथ आर अवेलेबल देयर. एंड अगर कोई किसी तरह की कोई स्टिल आपको नहीं मिली है तो मेरे नंबर पे प्लीज कोई भी आप मैसेज कर सकते हैं. वी विल कनेक्ट टू यू. ओवर टू यू, सर.
Thank you. So today we'll be deliberating about place of supply under GST, and we'll also be talking about composite and mixed supply. When we talk about it, I've tried to cover the basic, the topic, what is place of supply in the legal terms, as well as I have put some case studies, double ARs, high court judgments, so हमको ज़्यादा better clarity दे पाएगी. What we'll try to cover today is, first of all, why do you need a place of supply? What is the need of having a place of supply? And what are intrastate and interstate supplies? We'll talk about place of supply of goods. We'll talk about place of supply in case of export and import of goods. We'll talk about place of supply of services, both in case of domestic transaction as well as आपका जो foreign abroad cross-border transactions for supply of services. Very critical point we'll be covering is, what happens in case my place of supply has been wrongly determined. मेरे को CGST, SGST लगाना था, but I'm imposed IGST. What do I do? And lastly, we'll also talk about composite and mixed supplies. And composite and mixed supplies also become important because depending on whether a supply is a good or service, आपका place of supply will be determined. So we'll start with the first topic. We are all meeting today, and I'll request everyone to please, participate. Please put in your comments in the chat box. Any queries or any thoughts you come across. I would like this entire session is interactive. So wherever if you can, put in your comments, will be really helpful. So first of all, why is place of supply? Why do you need a place of supply? So first of all, GST is a destination-based consumption tax. What I mean by destination consumption tax is that wherever the goods or services are consumed, you will levy a tax. Compare it to your old regime, the sales tax regime, where it was an origin-based, or for example, your excise duty was an origin-based. Irrespective of where your goods are being consumed, you would have to pay a tax on it. Now, what happens under GST is that wherever the goods or services are consumed, that particular state or union territory will get the revenue. So why do I need a place of supply? I need a place of supply to determine where my goods have been consumed, my services have been consumed. If I do not have a place of supply, what will happen is that you may have disputes among the states. Now, someone can ask me, sir, goods ka it's very easy. Let's say if I'm sitting in Delhi and I send some goods to Gurgaon, Haryana. So goods have been consumed in Haryana. It is very simple. Absolutely, it is very simple when it comes to goods. But what about services? You have services which are intangible. Now, for example, if I take a flight from Delhi and if I fly to Bombay, I cross multiple states. So every state would come up and say, okay, I need my revenue because you have used a part of my territory. Or for example, let's say if I buy goods in Haryana and I'm a CA and I take those goods for audit in, let's say, Mumbai. So where has the goods been consumed? So there could have been multiple scenarios, and the place of supply in that sense, आपको कुछ naming fictions के साथ and logic-based approach के साथ, the place of supply tells you where the goods or services have been consumed, basis which you will come to know कि आपका किस state या किस UT को revenue accrue करेगा. The entire GST, तो जैसे हमारे पास IGST है, IGST is nothing but if you look at it is a summation of CGST plus SGST, and in intrastate you have CGST and SGST. So this entire place of supply helps you determine where that SGST or that SGST component of IGST should go and accrue. So if you can track that, you'll be able to track the entire mechanism that where your revenue is flowing. It will be really helpful, and it'll also be helpful in the place of supply. Once you get a catch of the concept, it also help you find that where I can take inputs, where I cannot take inputs. It's all connected, because let's say if I have a place of supply in Delhi, can I take an input in Haryana? So things like those. So place of supply will help you determine correctly कि आपका किस state को revenue accrue हुआ है and can you take inputs of them. So place of supply का you'll also have an interplay with your input tax credits. Now I'll start with the basics. What are intrastate and interstate? I think most of us are aware that if the goods or services are supplied within the same state or within the same CUT, Section 8 talks about intrastate supply. What I mean by the same state and the state duty is the location of the supplier and the place of supply. For example, let's say if I'm in Delhi and if I supply some services, the place of supply of the same is Delhi, so I'll apply a CGST plus SGST. Whereas in case if I am a supplier based in Delhi, and if I supply some services to a organization which is based in Gurgaon, so that will be an IGST, because the location of the supplier, that is me as a service provider, and the place of supply, that is my customer, are in different states or in different UTs. So intrastate, fairly simple. If the location of the supplier and the place of supply are in the same state or the same UT, you'll apply a CGST and a SGST, and it is called the intrastate supply. Other than that, you have interstate supply. So the opposite of this is if the location of the supplier and the place of supply are in different states, you'll apply IGST, which is an interstate. Other than that, the government has also specified some other transactions which is deemed as an interstate. For example, the first one is supply of goods imported into territory of India till they cross the custom frontiers of India. So what it could have been. This is basically your high sea sales, supply of goods which have been imported before they cross the customs frontier, or an inbound sale. An inbound sale is basically when you sell goods from one customs bond to another customs bond before filing your bill of entry for home consumption, or a high sea sales. So section 7 subsection 2 deems it as a IGST. It's an interstate supply. Now I'll request the participants, if they could answer that. Let's say if I have a transaction which is an IGST, does it necessarily mean I have to pay taxes on it? For example, let's say if I look at section 7 subsection 2, I have supply of goods imported into territory of India till they cross the custom frontiers, right? So the goods have not crossed the customs frontier, but if I sell the goods to someone, and this transaction, the high sea sales, or for example a bond to bond sale, is an interstate supply as per section 7. So I'll request the participants, if they could also put in their answers in the chat box, that does qualifying a transaction as an interstate transaction necessarily mean I have to pay taxes? So if anyone could put in their answers. So I'll just answer this one. So see, it's an interstate or an intrastate supply basically is just characterizing where the revenue should accrue, but whether it is a supply per se, you'll have to go back to section 7. Yes, Vanita is answered and absolutely right that no, just because it's an interstate, does not necessarily mean that it's a supply. For supply, we have already covered, you'll have to go back to section 7 of the CGST Act, which determines whether it is a supply. Now, high C sales, high C sales in any case is not considered as a supply because section 7 schedule 3 has removed it by an amendment. So high C sales or inbound sales are not considered as a supply. The second is coming to subsection 7, subsection 4, supply of services imported into territory of India. So every time you import any services from abroad to India, you will have to pay IGST. That is why you always pay IGST under RCM in case of import or services. You never pay CGST, SGST in case of import or services into India. Then there are some specific cases. Section 7, section 5, it talks of when the supplier is located in India and the place of supply is outside India. So this is an export transaction. An export transaction is an interstate transaction. If tax were to be paid, IGST should have been paid. It's a separate thing that we have a concession. हमारे पास section 16 में इसकी zero rating करी गई है, तो हमारे पास option है कि हम इसको LUT में pay करें, LUT में हम इसको under bond करें without payment या on payment करें, but it continues to be an IGST sale. So that is the reason जब भी आप export करते हैं आपको IGST ही लगाना है. There is no concept of a CGST or SGST. Similarly, in case goods are supplied to or by an SEZ, it's always considered as a IGST supply. And lastly, supply of goods or services in a taxable territory not being intrastate. So this was something, I'll cover this with the case. For example, let's say if I'm based out in Gurgaon and if I sell goods to someone who is based out in Mumbai, so it's a bill to ship to, but the goods actually have moved from a place outside. Let's say the goods have moved from China to, let's say, Dubai. The actual movement was China to Dubai, but the title transfer was from, let's say, Haryana to Delhi. In that case, you would have no tax again because of an exclusion under schedule when it's a third-party sale, third country sale. Otherwise, section 7, subsection 5C is a generic section which tries to cover all other supplies which could not have been classified as an interstate or an intrastate supply. So the basic concept being, to summarize, is that if my location of the supplier and place of supply is within the same state or the same UT, it is an intrastate, I apply C+S. If my place of supplier and my place of supplier in a different UT, different state, or a different state in a UT, I apply IGST. Typically, all cross-border transactions, may it be import of goods, may it be export of goods, may it be import of services, may it be export of services, would typically qualify as an IGST supply. Basically, it's an interstate supply. So now we'll talk about place of supply of goods, and we'll be talking about them. I'm sure everyone is aware of the basic concepts. We'll try and cover and understand this with case laws and what the latest developments have been. So I'll start with section 10(1) subclause, which says that where the supply of good involves. So this is a case I'm determining place of supply. The section 10 will have separate clauses to it. So I'm talking about section 10(1)(a). Starts by saying where the supply involves movement of goods, whether by the supplier or the recipient or by any other person. The place of supply of such goods shall be location of the goods at the time at which the movement of the good terminates for delivery to the recipient. So fairly simple. The section says is that if goods have moved from one place to another, as in my supply requires the movement of goods from one place to another, that movement could be done by anyone, the supplier, the recipient, or by any other person, then the place of supply shall be the location at the point where the movement has terminated. So we'll talk about it in a simple case law. It's a simple case study. Let's say if I'm sitting in Delhi and I sell goods to a customer in Haryana. So it's a free on road contract. So I am liable to deliver the goods, let's say, to his premises. So I'll be charging my place of supply would be Haryana. I'll be charging IGST because as a supplier, my location of going back to section 7, my location as supplier is Delhi. My place of supply is where the movement has terminated, that is Haryana, and it will be an IGST case. Now let's talk of a case which is X works. For example, if I am based out in Delhi and my customer comes to my shop and the customer is based out in Haryana and he takes the goods from me. Now, in what happens in that case? So do I apply a CGST, SGST saying that the movement has terminated here, or do I apply a IGST? I'll request if the members could answer, and also try and get answer ki what happens जैसे counter sale होता है. आप let's say अगर आप करोल बाग जाएं, नेहरू प्लेस जाएं दिल्ली में, तो there's a lot of walk-in customers, right? And every time आपके पास walk-in customer आता है, it may not be possible ki, how do I determine a place of supply because everything is selling. So what do you do in that case? So counter sale, Ayush is saying C plus S. Okay. So for counter sale, so X works or counter sale, similar concept. So if you go back to section 10(1)(a), it says that where the movement of goods is done whether by the supplier or the recipient, which means I as a supplier in this case, which is Delhi, could move the goods, or my customer who has come to my shop could move the goods. In either case, wherever the movement terminates, that will be the place of supply. Now the question which arises, like Ayush has answered, the counter sale is C plus S, because what happens as a counter sale, I am not aware. What should I do? मुझे कैसे पता लगेगा? So इसमें we'll have to move with some assumptions, and law ने कैसे हम लोग को help भी करा है. They have devised a mechanism through which we'll have to determine a place of supply. So for example, if I have a B2B transaction, right? If I have a B2B transaction, if I'm selling goods to someone, typically you assume that the B2B transaction, let's say if my customer comes to Delhi, and if he takes a delivery on Delhi address, so he comes to, it's a X works delivery, he gives me his Haryana GST. So I'll typically assume that my place of supply would be Haryana. One reason that he'll not get input if I charge C plus S, but that is not the actual reason. The actual reason is he'll have to then come and specify you ki, let's say मैं Delhi में goods करोल बाग से लिए, and I say कि I give you my Haryana GST, and if I don't tell you anything, you'll make a tax invoice और उस पर आप place of supply हरियाणा डाल देंगे और आप अपना e-way bill भी हरियाणा का डाल देंगे. But let's say this customer then takes the goods to Mayur Vihar. If it takes the goods to Mayur Vihar, he doesn't tell you, then there will be a conflict because your goods will be moving within the state, but your e-way bill and your tax invoice will talk of place of supply as Haryana. So as a customer, I will only come up and tell you that this is my place of supply, because otherwise I will be stuck. If my value is less than 50,000, understand it's a small value. वहाँ पे, in any case, your customer will come and tell you because उनको input चाहिए होगा. They'll come and tell you. Typically, a B2B customer will come and tell you that if I'm based out in Haryana and taking this goods to Haryana. In case he doesn't tell you, you will assume he is taking those goods to Haryana. He'll have to otherwise specify the contrary कि मैं इनको दिल्ली में लेके ही consume करने वाला हूँ. I have a question from Ayush. In case of counter sale, someone is giving GST in another state, I or C&S also. So, okay, if he is giving you a GST in this case only, if I'm based in Delhi, and मेरे को हरियाणा का GST दिया जाता है, I will first charge. I'll assume it is Haryana because हरियाणा का GST आया है. And if my customer accepts this, I'll have to create an e-way bill also. So I'll create an e-way bill from Haryana, right? So either your customer will come and tell you, otherwise you'll have to ask him, because otherwise आप अपना tax invoice और e-way bill को complete ही नहीं कर पाएंगे. So you don't have an option but to ask him कि आपका place of delivery क्या होगा. So the way the law has been framed, because आपका rule 46 subclause 9 requires you to disclose a place of supply in the tax invoice. Your e-way bill requires you to give a place of delivery. So the law has been devised in such a way that you'll have to find out whose ultimate delivery कहाँ लेके जानी है. If you do not have that information, so there are chances कि आपकी goods in the moment could be intercepted. Otherwise उसको input नहीं मिलेगा. So either the customer will intimate you कि okay, I'm taking this goods to this address. अगर वो हरियाणा का customer is taking those goods to Haryana, he'll tell you. Otherwise you'll assume. If it doesn't tell you, you'll assume he's taking to Haryana. If he takes those goods to, let's say, Mayur Vihar or Rajasthan, he'll have to tell you, because otherwise आप तो e-way bill उसको हरियाणा का issue कर देंगे, तो वो goods लेके ही नहीं जा पाएगा. There are chances कि interception हो जाएगा. इसलिए he will come and tell you. A B2B customer will typically come and tell you that this is where I'm taking the goods. In a B2C transaction also, you'll have a similar case. And B2C mein, the beauty is that how the law has been made that even if it is a B2C transaction, as a registered supplier, I am required to issue an e-way bill. So just because in order to still have to require an e-way bill if my value is more than 50,000. So in any case, still I'll have to ask him what is your place of delivery. Once I know the place of delivery, I can easily apply C plus S or I. If the value is less than 50,000, yes, but वो इतना छोटा amount है, that is how the law has been framed, that less than 50,000 they have left it go. But if the value is more than 50,000, I am liable to create an e-way bill. And when I'm making an e-way bill, I'll ask my customer that where do you want the delivery. So in either case, आप counter sale के अंदर भी, while it looks that you may not have a place of supply, but the way the law has been made, you have no option but to ask for कि आप delivery कहाँ लेने वाले हैं, because otherwise आप e-way bill भी नहीं बना पाएंगे ठीक से और आप अपना tax invoice भी नहीं बना पाएंगे. So I hope this is fairly clear that come what may, I'll have to take a place of supply, I'll have to ask for a delivery location, because otherwise I cannot comply with the law. So the way the law has been structured, you will also always come to know that what is my place of delivery, and basis which then I can determine whether I need to apply C+S or in IGST. So I'm moving forward. In case there are any questions, please put in. I have a question from Ayush. Says if the value of goods is more than, agreed Ayush. So in that case, it's excuse. I told you not every case is covered, but most of your transactions will be covered. This also applies to cases, where the value is less than 50,000. So agreed, there are some cases which will go out, but in a B2C, in any case, no credit will be available. So I understand that there are some gaps in the law, but most of your transactions will be covered. I'm moving on to the next section which talks about, so this is a typical section. The way this section has been drafted, we'll go through the section point by point, deliberated. It's a very typical section. Past mein it's a simple section in the sense it's a bill to ship to transaction, like you all understand. I'm just reading the section and I'll just try and highlight some discrepancies which I feel, which are there and which could not have been there. So it starts by saying where the goods are delivered. So the key point is this helps you determine a place of supply in case the goods have been delivered by the supplier to a recipient. So it will help you determine so it says where the goods are delivered by the supplier to a recipient or any other person on direction of a third person. Okay. Now the first question that comes to my mind is who is this third person? Because आपने supplier भी ले लिया, आपने recipient भी लिया और एक any other person भी ले लिया. अब any other person के बाद भी कोई third person है is something, the way the section is interpreted, it is very cryptic. Who is this third person? Because everyone is covered. If I have any other person, so that any other person was wide enough to cover everything. Then it says whether acting as an agent or otherwise. So if it says whether acting as an agent or otherwise, so it covers both cases, whether it's an agent or not an agent. So in that sense, these words become superfluous because कोई purpose नहीं resolve करे. आप agent हो नहीं हो, आपने तो दोनों को cover कर ही लिए. Assuming whether acting as an agent or otherwise ना होता, तब भी section का effect same ही रहता. Before or during the movement. So basically the transfer of title has to be before or during the movement. Once the goods have been delivered, then it will be a fresh supply. Then it cannot be a supply of section 10(1)(b), either by way of transfer of documents of title to the goods or otherwise. Again, same jo hamara either acting as an agent or otherwise. What is the purpose of having this line? Either by way of transfer of documents of title or otherwise, because then it covers everything. It is so broad. It shall be deemed that the said third person, again coming back to the original query, who is this third person? Because आपने जब any other person लिख ही दिया था, so who is this third person? Is it someone else? Is it the same person like any other person? So that is something which is cryptic. It shall be deemed that the third person has received the goods and the place of supply of such goods shall be the principal place of business of such person. Section has its own, there could be some difference in opinion ki how do you interpret it, but over a period of time, over a period of 5 years, what everyone agrees and jo practice in trade hai, we typically take them as a bill to ship to transaction. So how it is being currently interpreted is that where goods are delivered by a supplier to the recipient or to any other person on direction of a third person. So typically yahan pe there is another discrepancy if I can point out. Recipient is defined as a person who is liable to pay consideration, right? Then says hum bill to ship ko mein kya karte hain? Let's say if A has billed to B and B has billed to C and A has directly shipped to C. Let me just open the slide. I think yes. So supplier A has billed to supplier B and supplier B has given it to final customer C. And the goods have moved from supplier A to customer C. So in this case, your recipient is supplier B. Now, if you go back to the section says where the goods are delivered by the supplier to a recipient. So in that case, it is not typically covering a bill to ship to transaction, but how it is being interpreted by the trade, even by the department. If you look at their FAQs and circulars, they are treating it as a bill to ship to transaction. In this sense, the way they are using recipient here is in the context that the person who is receiving the goods, and not in the sense that the person who is actually making the payment. So 10(1)(b), how the department is interpreting, how the trade is interpreting it, is that where the goods are delivered by supplier to a recipient being a person other than the person who is actually being billed, before or during the movement of the goods, it shall be deemed that the said third person has received the goods. This becomes important for taking input, and the place of supply of such goods shall be the principal place of business. I have a question from Ashwinji. He says supplier is in Gujarat, supplier in Gujarat, buyer in Delhi, ultimate recipient in Gujarat. Is it an intra-state transaction? How to raise invoice from Delhi buyer to Delhi seller to Gujarat recipient? I'll just cover that, Ashwinji. So if your transaction, if my supplier is in Gujarat, my buyer is in Delhi. So for this is a typical section 10(1)(b) case. So my Gujarat supplier will charge an IGST because for him the place of supply. For him, the place of supply is the place of supply of the third person, which in your case is the buyer in Delhi. So Gujarat supplier will charge an IGST to the Delhi buyer. The Delhi buyer will then raise another invoice and he'll charge IGST to the Gujarat final customer. The goods will move directly from Gujarat to Gujarat. So while the movement is within the same state, there will be two invoices. One invoice from Gujarat to Delhi, IGST, another invoice from Delhi to Gujarat. Now, if you link it back to the original concept कि मेरा revenue कहाँ accrue होना चाहिए, final consumption हो रही है, तो अगर आप original इसको by the place of supply, this is where it becomes important. कि जब मैंने goods गुजरात से दिल्ली dispatch करे, sorry गुजरात से गुजरात dispatch करे and I invoiced it from Gujarat to Delhi, मैंने IGST charge करा, तो my SGST component went and accrued into Delhi government, right? बट जब दिल्ली वाले ने उसका सेम इनवॉइस गुजरात को करा तो उन्होंने वापस गुजरात आईजीएसटी करके वो सारे का सारा पोर्शन गुजरात आ गया है. तो इट्स जस्ट टेकिंग अ लॉन्गर रूट. तो पहले आपका जो आईजीएसटी कंपोनेंट है, इट विल गो फ्रॉम गुजरात टू दिल्ली, बट देन विल अगेन कम बैक टू गुजरात. सो एंड द गुड्स आर एक्चुअली मूविंग टू गुजरात. सो आपकी जो कंजम्पशन हो रही है अल्टीमेटली वो गुजरात में हो रही है, एंड योर रेवेन्यू इज आल्सो इक्वल टू गुजरात. So in this case, so for answering Ashwinji's query, so your first invoice will be an IGST, Gujarat to Delhi. Your Delhi to Gujarat will also be an IGST. Yes, and I'll just cover e-way bill. Ashwin is just about to cover e-way bill. So how do you issue e-way bill in this case? There are two ways of covering, issuing e-way bills. So one is your bill to ship to transaction, where the Delhi supplier will issue an invoice in the name of Haryana and also issue an e-way bill, where he'll write bill to Haryana, but he'll write ship to कस्टमर सी. बट इसमें प्रॉब्लम क्या है, मान लीजिए आपने दिल्ली से इनवॉइस मंगाया 100 का और आपने आगे 200 का बेचा. सो माय कस्टमर विल नो, बिकॉज गुड्स जब वहां डिलीवर हो रहे हैं तो विल आल्सो गेट अ कॉपी ऑफ द ई-वे बिल. ही विल नो दैट आपका 100 रुपीस का मार्कअप है. सो टू डील विद दिस बिजनेस प्रॉब्लम और द गवर्नमेंट हैज डन इज कि गवर्नमेंट ने एक बिल फ्रॉम डिस्पैच फ्रॉम ई-वे बिल का एक उन्होंने मॉड्यूल बनाया, जिसमें आप इनवॉइस जो आपका इनवॉइस ई-वे बिल के साथ जाएगा, दैट विल बी द इनवॉइस which supplier B will raise. The bill from will state supplier B. The value which comes in the e-way will be rupees 200, and there will be an address of dispatch from, where only the address of supplier A will come. So my e-way bill value, my invoice number, everything will be of supplier B. So your final customer in C look at the e-way bill, उसको इतना पता लगेगा कि किसी दिल्ली में किसी एड्रेस से माल आया है, बट किस वैल्यू पे आया है, किस एंटिटी से आया है, that will all still not be known to him. So ये बिजनेस प्रॉब्लम आ रही थी इनिशियली कि जब आप बिल टू शिप टू कर रहे थे, उस केस में आपके फाइनल कस्टमर को आपका मार्कअप और कहां से गुड्स है वो पता लग जाता था. तो कस्टमर आपको ना ऑर्डर दे के पहला ऑर्डर दे के वो डायरेक्टली गो टू योर कस्टमर सप्लायर हु इज इन दिल्ली. एक और क्वेश्चन इसमें आता है, बिल टू शिप टू में कैन इट ओनली इन्वॉल्व 3 पार्टीज? लेट्स से ए ने बी को बेचा, बी ने सी को बेचा. वी ऑल नो, क्लियर है, ए ने बी को बिल करा, बी ने सी को बिल करा, एंड ए ने सी को शिप करा. द क्वेश्चन इज व्हाट इफ ए ने बी को बेचा, बी ने सी को बेचा, सी ने डी को बेचा. सो व्हाट डू आई डू? हाउ डू आई मेक अ ई-वे बिल? हाउ डू आई रेज एन इनवॉइस? एंड मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंटली, कैन आई आल्सो कवर दिस ट्रांजैक्शन अंडर 10(1)(b? आई रिक्वेस्ट द पार्टिसिपेंट्स इफ यू कैन शेयर देयर थॉट्स कि does 10(1)(b only mean there are 3 parties? Because reading of it से तो ऐसा ही लग रहा है, because यहाँ पे भी वो कहते हैं the third person. If you look at this, it says that it shall be deemed the third person. So from reading, apparently ऐसा लग रहा है, but I'll still like to know what are the thoughts. If anyone would like to share their thoughts, in a 10(1)(b) transaction, what we are discussing, can you have more than 3 parties? Anyone would like to answer? So Ramesh ji has correctly answered yes. There may be 4 parties. Yes, and I also have an order reply from Lalita. Yes, I think absolutely everyone is on the right track. And so absolutely right. Similar case, एक double AR Gujarat double AR का ही case है. House and Joke Steels, and the observation was where A had sold to B, B had sold to C, and C had sold to D. So the double AR observed that 10(1)(b) does not restrict the number of parties. Now the question is, how do I prepare an e-way bill? A ने B को बेचा, B ने C को बेचा, C ने D को बेचा, ultimate delivery D की है. So who will issue an e-way bill? If I can have an answer to this, it'll be great. Who will be issuing a e-way bill? In A selling to B, B selling to C, C selling to D, and goods will ultimately delivering to D. So I think I'll just take up this one. So the double AR actually answered this also. So what they answered was, see, here again, you could have a, I think I have an answer. B to D will generate an e-way bill. Yes, that could be one, absolutely. Another way could be, Ashwinji, C could also do the same thing. C could also generate an e-way bill. The double AR, how the double AR answered was that let A generate to B and the ship to address should be D. But in that case, everyone was a related party, so the markups were known. But Ashwinji has rightly answered, because if they're all unrelated parties, आप markup disclose अगर नहीं करना चाहते. In that case also, Ashwinji, while legally are absolutely right कि B will generate an invoice, e-way bill to D. एक मेरा थोड़ा सा concern है that D will come to know कि C का कितना margin है. C is also unrelated. So rather, practically speaking, I'd say let C raise an e-way bill. And bill from dispatch from me, C will raise an e-way bill. The dispatch address will be A, and that way your final customer D will never come to know of your markup. एक और आजकल इसी section में is another controversy, a latest controversy which has come up is, okay. It says where the goods are delivered by the supplier to a recipient or any other person on direction of a third person. इस पूरे section में जो emphasis है, that is on the word person. Okay. Now, if you go to section 2, how does section 2 define person? It says person includes any individual HUF company. So the way section 2 defines person is वो हर legal entity को एक separate person treat करता है. If that is the case, let's say if I sell goods to A sells goods to B Haryana, as in B is Haryana GST, and delivers it to B's Delhi GST. So B in that sense is the same legal entity. A is a legal entity selling to B legal entity, but sending to separate address of B legal entity. So can I still cover it under 10(1)(b)? Can I have some answers to this also? I'll just open the section so everyone can have a look. So going through the section 10(1)(b), can in a bill to ship to transactions, does it necessary to have 3 legal entities, or can I also have 2 legal entities? Can I say A billing to B and sending it to B's separate GSTN? Gashwinji is answering. I'll request everyone to participate. Anything which comes, what is your thought on it? Reading the section. Ashwinji has rightly answered that there could be 2 legal entities. Now I'll just add on to what Ashwinji is saying. The reason why it could be so is because section 25(4) specifically deems that a person who has obtained 1 or more registration, whether in the same state, जैसे आप vertical registration लेते हैं for different verticals, or in different states or UTs, they are treated as a distinct person for the purpose of this act. Having said this, practically there are notices being issued on this very dispute that 10(1)(b) can only have 3 legal entities. There are 2 legal entities. So we had recently come across such a notice where department has alleged that 10(1)(b) you cannot have you cannot have less than 3 legal entities. So I think we are another thing, another thing. Let's say if A sells to B, okay, and ships it to C. Now जब A ने C को शिप करा, But let's say the goods have been brought from A to B, but B leases them to C, in the sense that B is not making a supply of goods, he's making a supply of service. Okay. So what happens in that case? How do I issue a e-way bill? I'll just take up this one also. So in such a case, A issues a tax invoice to B, B issues a delivery challan to C, because services ka aapka invoice alag se jayega. And basis the delivery challan is again based on the value of the goods. You again have an option to either make a bill to ship to e-way bill, or you have an option of making a bill from dispatch from e-way bill. जब आप ऊपर e-way bill select करते हैं, there are two reasons. Says for supply, other than supply. So other than supply, you select as an e-way bill, and you generate a e-way bill. Because we came across this case for one of the companies. So in COVID times, what happened was this company would order laptops for their employees. Now the employees were all across India. So, you know, instead of calling the laptops at their own office, they would then, they would directly dispatch the laptops to the employees, but the invoice would come in the entity's name, and they would then take input on the assumption that the goods have only temporarily moved to my employee's location, which will then come back to me. Ashwinji, if you could please clarify, you're talking of 4 entities in a 10(1)B transaction? Okay, in a 4 entities, what Ashwinji, you are saying B to D will generate an e-way bill. Absolutely right, I agree. This is absolutely legally correct. The only point for generating a B to D e-way bill was that your D would come to know of your margins. In a unrelated, if the parties are unrelated, in that case, C may not want D to know ki uska kitna markup hai. So that being the case, while what you said from a B to D, it is absolutely right. You could generate. So the e-way bill could be generated by A, B, or C. The problem with generating an e-way bill from A or B is कि C का margin B के पास चले जाए. So that is the only problem. E-way bill आप कहीं से भी generate कर लें इस पूरी लेग में, क्योंकि यहाँ तो आप bill from dispatch from करें या bill to ship to करें, वो आप किसी भी A, B, C में कहीं भी आप करेंगे. अगर आप B पे हैं तो आप bill from dispatch from कर लीजिए, वो आपका bill to dispatch from कर लीजिए. It will be okay. My query is not for e-way bill, but how to generate e-invoice. So your e-invoice would, sir, continue. And okay, so your e-invoice, E would generate an e-invoice to B. Your shipping address will again be shown as B. B would generate an e-invoice to C. Your shipping address would be seen as D. And C would generate an e-invoice to D, and shipping address would be shown as D. I hope that answers Ashwinji. We can connect for this. I think we're slightly short on time. We can take these queries once the session is through. It's only 40-45 minutes to go. But I think just have normal paper invoice karte hain. So A to B, B to C, C to D, your invoice also moves in the same flow. So I'll just move forward. I think we are through with this section as far as your bill to ship to transactions are concerned. Some specific cases, I'll just touch upon them. One is where there is no movement of goods. जैसे let's say आपने जिसको हम possessive constructive possession कहते हैं. For example, आपके goods कहीं पड़े हैं, then आपने किसी को बेच दी without any movement. या let's say there's a godown में goods पड़े हैं, आपने godown की चाबी किसी को दे दी, but goods वहाँ से move नहीं करे. तो let's say if my customer is in Delhi, my goods are in my Delhi warehouse. My customer is in Delhi, and my seller is in Haryana. Okay, my Haryana seller now goes to Delhi, and he says ki okay, goods aap le lijiye. So in that case, your Haryana supplier will charge a IGST, because the place of supply, the location of supply will be Haryana. The place of supply will the goods were kept and there was no movement. In that case, that will be a IGST. So fairly simple. If there is no movement, तो जहाँ पे भी आपके goods होंगे वो आपका place of supply बन जाएगा. Location of supply, in any case, you will be aware of. So then the same state you charge a C+S, otherwise you charge an IGST. Another cases where goods are assembled or installed at a site, the place of supply shall be where the goods are installed or assembled. And lastly, this is where the goods are supplied on board a conveyance, including a vessel, aircraft, train, a motor vehicle. The location shall be where the goods are taken on board. So to give you an example, let's say if I'm taking a flight from Delhi to Mumbai, so I'll cross multiple states, right? If the goods are supplied on board, so let's say if I buy a sandwich or if I buy a cold drink on the flight, Now, एक तो तरीका ये था, and why the deeming fiction? There's a deeming fiction in this section because एक तो तरीका है कि उस वक्त मेरा प्लेन कहाँ पे है, गुजरात, राजस्थान जहाँ भी है, उस वक्त उधर का आप बोलो कि यहाँ पे गुड्स डिलीवर हुए, तो यहाँ प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई हो गया और मेरा लोकेशन ऑफ सप्लायर आई एम अवेयर, जो मेरी फ्लाइट जहाँ जिस बिजनेस रजिस्टर्ड है और मैं उस हिसाब से उधर IGST करूँ, बट दिस वाज नॉट प्रैक्टिकली फिजिबल। तो उसके लिए दे हैव गिवन अ डीमिंग फिक्शन कि जहाँ भी गुड्स आप ऑन बोर्ड लेंगे फॉर अ कन्वेंस, मे बी अ फ्लाइट, वेसल or a train or a motor vehicle, in that case that will be your place of supply. Your location of supply in any case you're aware of, and basis that you can charge a C+S or an IGST. If any questions, if anyone has, Ashwin will take up your questions once we're through the session. If anyone, I hope we are clear, we can move forward with this one. So I'll just talk about import and export, fairly simple. So in case the goods are imported into India, so once the goods are imported into India, the location of importer, that will be the place of supply. And so why this happens, okay? So जब आप IGST लगाते हैं, for example, if I'm a Mumbai importer, if I'm a Delhi importer, whenever the goods come, okay, you charge an IGST of, so you assume it's that state's IGST. तो दिल्ली में आए हैं तो दिल्ली का ही IGST assume करते हैं. Bill of entry only says IGST, but you still assume that it's a Delhi IGST. अगर आप Bombay के importer हैं तो you assume it's a Bombay IGST because of this section. Wherever the goods are exported outside India, it shall be the location which is outside India, which is your place of supply. So fairly easy on the export and the import side. We'll move to the place of supply of services, and we'll try and understand this with some case studies. So place of supply of services, two parts. One is where the location of the supplier of service and the location of the recipient of service both are in India. If this condition is not satisfied, that is, location of the supplier and location of the recipient both are outside India, location of the supplier is in India, location of the recipient is outside India, or location of the supplier is outside India, location of the recipient is within India, in that case section 12 will not apply. Section 12 will only apply where location of the supplier and location of the recipient is within India. So general rule very similar to जो हमारा service tax में pops होता था, place of provision rules, that if I'm, other than specified cases, if I'm making a supply to a registered person, the place of supply shall be location of such registered person. And what is the location of this registered person is basically, it goes on to define that if he is registered, if it's a registered person, so the principal place of business. If not, then you come back to your fixed establishment, otherwise the establishment which is most concerned. In other cases where it is not known, where your customer is not a B2B customer, the location shall be address which exists on the record, and assuming कि आपके पास address भी नहीं है record पे, and it's a B2C customer, for example, आप let's say the specific service आपकी कोई let's say आपका mobile का, for example, mobile rather you would have a place of supply. Any other case you don't have an address of the customer in your record, it will be the location of the supplier. So fairly easy. In a B2B transaction, your place of supply is where your customer is registered. I have a query. So I have a query from, okay. So I'll just take up a query. I have a query from one of the participants that can you explain how an entity should book hotel accommodation related invoices in case of state that the entity is not registered under GST, as place of supply will always be the place of registration, that the entity should ask the hotel to issue B2C invoice, and entity should not report in GSTR 2. So, to the participant, I'd like to say that as of now, it's absolutely right that I'll just take up this. Let me come to the the immovable property rule. We'll take up this query there. This is related to your hotel accommodations. We'll first try and understand the basic concept. So let's say if there's a, and I like the members to participate, we'll take up the query on immovable property once we cover up that section. So let's say if there's a CA firm based out in Delhi, and it gets a service order from a company in Mumbai to conduct a stock audit, of a factory in Haryana. So what would my place of supply be? Would my place of supply be Mumbai, or my place of supply would be the factory because my audit is being conducted for the factory in Haryana. And if that is the case, Haryana would be benefited in that sense. So what would be my place of supply? I request if the members could answer in. So I have an answer. It says Mumbai. Okay. Okay. I'll just, we'll just do a deep dive into this query and also try to understand how will the revenue flow, because ultimately it is all about the revenue flow. I'll just expand this query. Let's say if there's a CA firm in Delhi and they get an order from an HO in Mumbai to conduct an audit of a Haryana factory, and this Delhi CA firm has a branch office in Haryana. So instead of they going on their own, they ask the branch office, it's the same entity, same PAN number, separate GST, and they ask the Haryana member that, okay, you please conduct the audit because it's a local audit, so you please conduct it. So what will be the place of supply? I'll just take up. Okay, so what will be the place of supply? So is the place of supply still Mumbai? How does the revenue accrue? Because ultimately, जिस state के अंदर services consume हुई हैं, उस state के पास वो benefit जाना चाहिए. So in this case, what you have in your screens, where a purchase order has come to Delhi from a company in Mumbai to conduct an audit in Haryana by a branch, and this company says to its branch office कि आप हरियाणा में इसको Haryana branch of audit ही कर दे, तो how does the revenue come to the ultimate destination? In both the cases, the place of supply is, in both cases, Haryana. Okay, so I think Ashwin ji, I'm talking of a general audit, Ashwin ji, I will not talk of a stock audit. If that changes the answer, I'm just talking of a general consulting or a general consulting assignment. So in this case, your place of supply, to my mind, continues to be Mumbai. How does the revenue actually come to Haryana, assuming that the services have been consumed in Haryana? So in the earlier case, what will happen is, the Delhi entity is going to invoice to Haryana. Now, ideally, what should have happened is that the Haryana, this Mumbai HO should have cross-charged it to Haryana. Assuming it was an ISD, it should have distributed the credit. Assuming it's not an ISD, the Mumbai office should have cross-charged. So for the Delhi CA form, the place of supply continues to be Mumbai because the recipient is a registered person. So the recipient is a registered person, the purchase order, the privity is between this Delhi GST and the Mumbai GST. So the Delhi would charge an IGST to Mumbai. Now the SGST has come and set into Mumbai. Now Haryana would say, okay, the services are finally consumed with me. How do I get my revenue? For that, Mumbai should cross charge to Haryana. In the second example, what will happen is the Haryana. So this flow remains the same. Okay, Delhi is going to invoices to the Mumbai, and Mumbai is going to cross charge or ISD to Haryana. Now Haryana branch should ideally cross charge it to Delhi, because if you look at it, this Haryana entity is also providing services, and they are within the same PAN, like I said, and any services even without consideration within the same PAN, you'll have to charge a GST as per schedule section 7. So your Haryana CA branch charges Delhi, cross charges Delhi. So the money, so the IGST comes and sits in Delhi. Delhi bills it to Mumbai. Mumbai bills it again back to Haryana. So the revenue ultimately accrues to Haryana. I hope I am clear on this. If anyone has any queries on this, we'll move forward. Okay, I'll move forward on this. Now we'll talk of, and I'll take up the query regarding the hotel accommodation. So in case the services, okay, so we'll just cover it. So Ayush has asked a query on cross charts. Okay, so this one, Ayush. So let's say that the what I said was that there's a CA firm in Delhi. The CA firm in Delhi is going to invoice the Mumbai because the work order actually comes from Mumbai. Okay, but the actual consumption of service had taken place in Haryana. So Haryana is required to get its revenue because it's a destination-based consumption tax. So the money has to come to Haryana. Now Delhi Now Delhi cannot invoice Mumbai because इनका कोई privity of contract. Sorry, Delhi cannot invoice Haryana because there is no privity of contract, and the work order has come from Mumbai. And who is the recipient? The recipient is the person who is liable to pay consideration. So if a work order comes from Mumbai, for Delhi, the recipient is Mumbai. So वो Mumbai के GST which is 27 के उसके ऊपर वो आपको IGST लगा देगा. Now the revenue has to actually come to Haryana because the service has actually been consumed in Haryana, right? So in that case, if you look at it, so what is happening is that Haryana is not consuming those services. Haryana is not consuming those services. The services are Mumbai is not consuming those services. The services are being consumed by Haryana. So Mumbai will have to then invoice Haryana. So in that sense, your Mumbai entity has just stepped into. So it's like Mumbai entity is actually providing those audit services, not in a strict sense in terms of flow of the revenue, because Haryana के पास जो services actually Haryana consume हुई है और वर्क ऑर्डर मुंबई ने दिया था, बट मुंबई ने वो सर्विसेज नहीं अपने लिए तो मतलब कंज्यूम करी नहीं है, तो वो मुंबई की तो है नहीं, तो मुंबई will have to in any case cross charge it to Haryana. And again, going back to the same example, that even if it's the same pen, even if no consideration is charged, Mumbai will still have to charge to Haryana because services are being consumed in Haryana. तो हरियाणा के सर्विसेज तो आई हैं for sure, वो सर्विसेज दिल्ली से नहीं आई हैं, तो those services actually come from Bombay. And how has Bombay got those services? Bombay has got those services through Delhi. I hope I'm clear, Ayush. Okay, move forward. Okay. So we have a case of, now we'll talk of immovable property, very similar to your place of provision under service tax. In case is a place of supply of services directly in relation to immovable property by way of, directly relating to immovable property is architects, engineers, construction service. B, by way of lodging, accommodation, hotels, or by way of accommodation for organizing any services or any ancillary service to the above. You could talk like repair and maintenance of your immovable property. The place of supply shall be where this immovable property is located. There is a proviso to it. It says if the location of the immovable property or boat or vessel is located or intended to be located outside. Why intended to be located? Let's say if I'm constructing a immovable property which is not yet constructed, so it is intended to be located outside. So if the location of the immovable property or boat or vessel is located or intended to be located outside India, the place of supply shall be location of the recipient. With the immovable property, we'll come to this also, where the immovable property is in more than one state. Let's say if I am constructing a highway between, let's say, Delhi to Chandigarh. So I'll have multiple states. I'll have Delhi, I'll have Haryana, a bit of Punjab, and then Chandigarh. There are 3 different states in one union territory. So which state, what is the place of supply? So do I go by number of kilometers? Let's say it's 120 kilometers, जिस पे जितना kilometers वैसे value appropriate करें, or how do I appropriate it? So we'll just deal with both those cases. So before taking the queries, one small, let's talk of this case, okay? Fairly simple. So let's say there's a building which is to be constructed in Dubai. Now there's an architect in Delhi. He gets a contract from the builder in Haryana, and this architect flies down to Dubai. Okay, what does he charge? Okay, he charges, for him the place of supply is Dubai. So the location of supplier is Delhi. The place of supply is Dubai. So it treats it out of India and makes it an export of service. Now let's talk of a case, and this was a double AR. So what happened was, there was a contract which was awarded to one of the companies by a foreign government. This company then subcontracted the same contract to an Indian entity for construction. Now the subcontractor went abroad for constructing the building. Now the question which arose was whether the subcontractor should charge GST, or the subcontractor should say that because the building is located outside India, I'll treat it that the place of supply is outside India, therefore I'll not charge. Request the participants if they could answer that building being made, let's say in Dubai, builder is in Haryana, okay, and he subcontracts it to another builder who is based out in Delhi. So what should the Delhi subcontractor charge? Should he charge GST, or should he treat it ki no, the place of supply is outside India, so I'll not charge GST? Request if the participants could answer. So I'll just take up this one. So similar case happened. So the government of Maldives had actually awarded a contract to NBCC, which is an Indian entity, to construct a building in Maldives. Now NBCC then gave it to a contractor called Shri Avantika Contractors to make that building, to actually go down to Maldives and make that, make that building. The double AR was filed. So the double AR was very clear. They said that the place of supply for Shri Avantika would be the post of, yes. So one of the participants said the place of supply would be Haryana. So yes, absolutely right. Because of the proviso, the place of supply would be Haryana, and your subcontractor would have to charge a GST based on that place of supply. So now question, okay, what will happen to the ITC? Because Haryana wala to bhi, Haryana ke liye will continue. So main builder will continue to be an export. So the main builder, if it is an export, will take the input and then it will have to file for a refund. So there will be no blockage of credit, but yes, you'll have to first pay your taxes and then you will have to take a refund of them. Now the next question, like we talked about, let's say a gas pipeline is being made, okay? Or let's say a highway is being made. Now this highway or this gas pipeline is being made from Delhi to Chandigarh. Multiple states, Delhi, Haryana, Punjab, and then the Union Territory of Chandigarh, okay? Now, how do I apportion the value? Do I apportion on the basis of value in the contract, or do I apportion on the basis of some other criteria? And what should that criteria be? So the law is very clear. I'll just read out this an explanation, which says that it should be apportioned in the proportion to the value of services which are separately collected or determined in terms of the agreement, or on any other basis as will be prescribed. So what will happen is that if my contract is specific, you look for the Haryana portion, for the Punjab portion, this is the amount of value which will get. So I'll have to apportion, assuming let's say my ratio is 25, 25, 25, 25%. I'll get equal share for each state as far as my billing or invoicing is concerned. So I'll assume कि this is the value जो हरियाणा के लिए accrue होएगा, ये दिल्ली के लिए, ये चंडीगढ़ के लिए और ये पंजाब के लिए. Assuming the contract is single, okay? The contract says कि no, I'll pay you let's say 1 lakh rupees in total. It does not give you कितना हरियाणा के लिए, कितना पंजाब के लिए. So you'll have to adopt a basis. So in this case, one of the bases could be your number of kilometers. So you'll have to come up, in case your contract is not clear, that what could be the basis on the value, some intelligent basis which you can bifurcate the value in case your removable property is more than in more than one state. Now I had a query on accommodation, that if I have an accommodation in a state where I'm not registered. So a couple of things. Absolutely right that C plus S is always charged in an accommodation. If you're not registered there, you cannot take your input tax credit. Whether an invoice is issued as a B2C or a B2B would not really change anything as of now, because currently what the trade practice is, I'll just summarize the query again for everyone's benefit. So a query was raised that let's say if I am in Haryana and my GST is in Haryana and I take a hotel accommodation in Delhi, my Delhi hotel will always charge me Delhi C plus S. So what should the entity do? Okay, because I'm not registered in Delhi and I'll not take a GST number, wo practically feasible nahi hai. So what should the entity do? Should the entity get the hotel to charge a B2C invoice, or the entity should not report it in GSTR2? So in that case, whether a B2B invoice is issued or a B2C invoice is issued, okay, I should not make too much of a difference practically, because as of now, within our 3B, we are not reporting ineligible input tax credits. But yes, in this GST Council meeting, there were some suggestions that we should report ineligible credit. Ayush has answered, and I agree that legally, so what has happened is there are two things. Okay, एक तो आपका legal procedure है, because the CGST Act is the same. So one way is आप एक CGST Act, you could take the CGST credit, but the problem with this is a practical problem, because your 2B when specifically says that your place of supply is different, so the chances of a departmental inquiry. So depending on the quantum, one could maybe take that risk there. And Ayush, there was a double AR on the very same fact, but unfortunately it was answered as negative. While there are separate SGSTs, the CGST remains the same. So legally agreed with Ayush, but the way the GST portal has been made or devised, you will not be able to get your input tax credit. Even if you take, there is a lot of litigation you'll have to face. So whether invoice is issued as a B2B or a B2C would not make too much of a difference. And when you talk of a B2C, a practical way would be to write the entity name. So there is no issue with your income tax deductions, but not furnish a GST number could be one way. But whether it's a B2B, B2C, we cannot take an ITC. I got a follow-up question. Is the entity originated in Gujarat and expenses need to be booked anyhow in Gujarat? Reporting to, we will separately take it. We'll separately take these questions once the session is over, because just have half an hour to go. So we'll take up these separately once we can explore an ISD route or something. We'll take them up subsequently. Okay, so this is fairly simple. Important point is that this list is specific. This is not an illustrative list. It says that places supply of restaurant, catering, personal grooming, fitness, beauty treatment, healthcare services shall be location where the service is actually performed. Let's say there's a patient, he's in Mumbai and he comes to Delhi AIMS. So I know I'm talking of a cosmetic surgery. Let's say it's a skin enhancement. So it's a cosmetic surgery and not an actual medical service. So let's say AIMS will have to charge him a C+S because the location of the supplier is AIMS is Delhi and the place of supply is where the surgery, cosmetic surgery is actually being done. This list is specific. This is not an illustrative list. Anything which is not covered in this is not covered by section 12 subsection 4. Be mindful of this. So if there's something else, you'll have to go to some other section, but not section 12 subsection 4. Again, training and performance appraisals. Let's say आप अपने employees को training देते हो as a company. So whatever the company's GSTN is, that is considered as your place of supply. So you can take inputs. In case it's a B2C, then again where the services are actually performed. The fairly simple section, we'll just run through them because I think a very critical part, section 77 and section 19 of how do you deal with wrong payment and composite and mixed supply. So I'll just run through these. Place of supply provided by of admission to a cultural, artistic, sporting, scientific, educational, entertainment, event or amusement park, any other place or service ancillary thereto shall be the place where event is actually held or where the park is actually located. Fairly simple. आपका जहाँ भी कोई event हो रहा है, जैसे offline seminars होते हैं, conferences होते हैं, या हम लोग के पास जैसे you have that प्रतिविधान, you have a fair or an exhibition. So place of supply where it is actually done. One question which comes to my mind and like the participants to answer this is, let's say it's an online training, okay, like this seminar, okay, assuming it's an online training, okay, and let's say assuming something was being charged. So what do? What is my place of supply? What is my place of supply? Let's say I'm based out in Delhi, okay, and I have a GST number in Delhi. I raise invoice from my Delhi GST. So what is my place of supply? Is my place of supply to be determined section 12.6 or as per general 12.3? So one answer which comes is registered address of the participant. Okay, for B2C, I think we are all fairly clear. It's more from a B2B perspective. Let's say my customer is a B2B. So what do I do? For an online training, do I go for 12 subsection 6, or do I go for the general, that is location of the registered person? What do I take as a place of supply in case of an online training? And let me add, let's say my trainer is in Delhi and usko Bombay mein hai. That guy is in Bombay in a hotel and he takes an online training. So where is the event being actually held? Can you call it's being held in Mumbai? We can have some answers. Okay, so to my mind, this case of an online training does not fall under section 12 subsection 6. It goes to a general rule of section 12 subsection 3. So Ayush should answer where the place is located. I slightly differ because to my mind, an online training does not fall under 12 subsection 6 because it says where that place is actually located. So this event is actually being done on an online platform. There's no physical place which is located. It's actually held or where the park or such a place is located. So in an online training, there is no place as such where the event is being held, because as a participant, I could be sitting anywhere in the world. So to my mind, section 12 of section 6 does not apply to an online training. You go back to your general section, section 12 of section 3, and you determine your place of supply basis, the location of the registered case, the location of the person, wherever his GST is located. Okay. Again, we have, so similar to the previous one. So this is more on organizing a culture. So we talked about admission to an event. Now the next is where someone is helping you organize a cultural event or an artistic or a sporting event or any services which are ancillary to it or sponsoring of your sign sponsorships. So your place of supply is in case of a registered person shall be location of such person, and other cases where if it's not a registered person, in cases where the event is being held. So it has a flavor of 12.3 actually if you look at it. In case of B2C, it is slightly different. So I'll just go forward with this one. Then you have transportation of goods. Again, wherever the registered person is located is your place of supply. Other than a registered person in B2C, where the goods are actually handed over, it is very similar to handing over food. If you remember place of supply of goods sold on board, where you would say that it is the place of supplies where the goods are actually put on board. We'll discuss the place of supply in case of transportation of goods. There was some discrepancy which was corrected in 2019 by the government. Okay. Let me just take this up only. Okay. We'll take it up when we take section 13. So we'll touch on this topic of what happens to a place of supply for transportation of goods of export. What happens? Do I apply section 12 or section 8? Let's say if I am a supplier in Delhi and I export goods to Dubai. Okay, so what should my place of supply be? We'll put this question on a pause for a moment and we'll take this up when we take up section 13. Then it says supply of services by way of transportation of goods. Okay, this is done. So okay, now we'll talk of a case where the location of the supplier of service or the location of recipient of service is within India. I'd like to ask the audience, what is my location of supplier of service and location of recipient of service? Both are outside India. Can anyone answer that? What happens in that case? What happens in a case where my location of supplier and location of recipient both are outside India? So, okay, so I'll answer this. So taxes is very basic. Rather, if you go back to step back, taxable act, taxable your constitution, there's something called a territorial nexus. If both my buyer, that is my customer or the recipient, and my supplier are located outside India, so typically as an Indian entity, as an Indian government will not have any control over them. So it's not absolutely right. Shubham has absolutely written that it's not taxable in India. Admin, there's someone logged in by admin is absolutely right. It's not taxable in India because otherwise क्या होता? Assume China से कोई माल India भेज रहा होता. China का customer, China के supplier से माल India भेज रहा होता. तो India would have tried to tax a transaction which is outside, which is not within its control. Okay. So we have a case similar to this where government has tried to tax. I'll just touch on your OEDR services. The supplier is outside India. In practical cases, there was a query also raised. There's practical cases. How do you implement it? Because factually, we have come across cases where entities have taken a stand that as Indian government, you are not empowered to levy those taxes on me because I am not located into India. There's no territorial nexus. Territorial nexus is a very broader concept, but they have tried to touch upon something like this in an OEDR service. Slightly different because see, after recipient pe to B2C mein, in a B2C transaction in OEDR service, they try to tax the supplier while the supplier is outside India. So assuming that dono hi outside hote, it would have been very difficult to implement it. So in any case, it's not taxable. So beyond the scope of our discussion. So general, again, the same, the place of supply should be the location of the recipient of services. And where it is not available, the place of supply should be the location of the supplier. Will very similar to the previous one, but I'll just take a more advanced case study. We'll leave the simple one aside. A lot of these MNCs, they would have something which is called a global shared service agreement, or they would have a global mandate with someone. Okay, let's say the consulting firm in UK. It's a separate legal entity and they enter into a consulting job with an MNC which is based in UK. Now, this consulting firm in UK has a subsidiary in Haryana, okay, Gurgaon. And the consulting assignment is also, let's say, related to a factory in Haryana of the MNC company, okay. So how does the revenue flow because these services have actually been consumed in Haryana. It's a fact. The services have been consumed in Haryana. तो हरियाणा के पास टैक्स तो आना ही चाहिए, टैक्स तो आना चाहिए. वो कैसे आएगा? We'll have to plot that way. If anyone like to answer, to put it in the chat. Because these services are being consumed in Haryana, it's a fact. The revenue has to come to Haryana. So that's a hint. But how does the revenue come to Haryana is the question. Okay, so I'll answer this. So a consulting firm will invoice, the UK consulting firm will invoice your MNC which is based in UK. Now this Haryana entity, this Haryana subsidiary is actually this Haryana subsidiary. If you look at it, the consulting firm should ideally, because the related party is also a subsidiary, this consulting firm in UK, the Haryana entity should actually invoice your consulting firm in UK. Okay. So the money, so there's an export transaction. Now, how does money come? So how it flows from UK to MNC is beyond our scope. But then again, the factory in Haryana should ideally treat it as an import of service. And even an import of service without consideration by a business entity is also treated as taxable under Section 7. So Haryana factory should ideally treat it as an import and pay RC on it. So that is how the money actually comes back to Haryana. So in one sense, when the subsidiary invoices the UK entity, it's an export. In that sense, the money goes out of the system because the Haryana subsidiary would then be claiming your refunds of the ITC. So in that sense, the money has, the revenue which was with the government has gone back to the taxpayer. So that money is out of government coffers, but it has to actually come to Haryana because the services are consumed in Haryana. So your MNC would, your Haryana factory would actually have to pay it under RC. So that is how the money actually comes back into Haryana. So we'll just touch upon the critical ones. Okay. So one is services supplied in respect of goods which are required to be made physically available to the recipient by the recipient of services, to supplier of services, or to a person acting on behalf of the supplier of services in order to provide the services. Then there is a proviso which was added later that in case it is by remote location, that services are provided from a remote location or electronic means. Just say up online, you should do troubleshooting on the computer. The place of supply shall be the location where the goods are situated at the time of supply of services. And lastly, a lot of goods were imported into India, and it was hampering because goods were imported into India for a temporary process or for a repair, but you would end up paying GST on it because your place of supply would be where the goods are located, which is in India. And the foreign customer would send your goods for repair into India. It will ultimately make India uncompetitive in the market. So this was another exception which was created. Fairly simple, very similar to Rule 4 of Place of Provision Rules 2012, that where goods are required to be made physically available by the recipient, the place of supply is where the goods are actually, made available. Okay. Now, a couple of questions on this. Okay. Recently, rather just walk through them. What happens in case of, let's say, I'm a software company. Okay. And as a software company, I'm required to make a software for your mobile. Okay, I make the entire software for your mobile. And मैं अब टेस्टिंग करने मेरे को सॉफ्टवेयर का, तो मैं आपसे एक मोबाइल का प्रोटोटाइप मंगाता हूँ कि आप मोबाइल का प्रोटोटाइप दे दीजिए और मैं उसको सॉफ्टवेयर को उसके ऊपर टेस्ट करता हूँ. Okay, or rather when I'm making that software, actually use that mobile to see whether it is actually in sync with the software that I'm making. So what will be the place of supply if anyone would like to answer? If I'm bringing in goods, if I'm making a software, developing a software in India, and that software is for a mobile. So to develop the software, I have to use a sample prototype जिस पे मैं सारा software develop करूँगा, and then I'll test it also. So I'll just answer this. So there was this issue which was being faced. So the government came out with a circular in 2019, 118 by 37 2019, which clarified in this case that your intent is not is not the services which are provided on the goods. That is only ancillary. My main intent is to develop a software. This testing is only ancillary, and in that sense is absolutely right. So Lalita is answer location of the recipient, absolutely right. The section, while the goods, the prototype actually came into India, but they were not considered the prime objective of the service. The prime objective was your development of the software. Another case was a lot of clinical trials were taken to India. So the government came out with a notification of 2019, where it said, various activities of clinical trial. What happens in a clinical trial is there are various parts or various stages to it. So you would import the newly developed pharmaceutical medicines into India and then carry out those tests. So the idea, so it was being taxed again into India, where it said that you are carrying out a service on the medicines which are imported, again making Indian exports uncompetitive. So the government came out with a notification on this. In a broader sense, the principle which emerges is that, are you actually providing services on the goods, or is there some other service and this is only ancillary? Now I'll talk of an example. Let's say if I have to undertake a market survey, there's a company which has to launch into India and they have to take a market survey, and let's say वो अपना detergent का या soap के 100 डब्बे मेरे को भेज देते हैं and say, you please carry out a market survey. Okay. And I am going to invoice that जो भी मेरा foreign entity agent ने मेरे को 100 pieces of soap भेजे. What happens? What is the place of supply? Do I say that my place of supply is India? Because वो जो market survey के लिए मेरे पास 100 boxes आए थे, वो India में आए थे. They're made physically available. Unless वो boxes होते, I could have not done a market survey. Therefore, the place of supply is India. That is option number 1. Or option number 2 is that foreign company's location who has actually given me the work order. If anyone would like to answer, market survey, I got 100 boxes from a company. I take those 100 boxes outside, show it to people, get a market survey done. And I give my report to the foreign entity. If anyone would like to answer that. Okay, so to my mind, your place of supply is the location of the foreign company. The same example was given in your education guide for service tax. The section was verbatim the same. It said that the intent is not the actual taking of goods from one place to another, as in not the 100 boxes which are being actually shown as a display. The intent was that report, and that report which comes out is finally being consumed outside India. Another example is your BIS. आपको quality certification जब आती है, आप पूरा एक batch बनाते हैं. Let's say I make a medicine, I want to get a BIS certification. I need electronic I made. So my batch will, let's say, consume of 1,000. I make camera, and there are 1,000 cameras in that batch. I sent 2 cameras. I sent 2 cameras for testing into India to get a certification. So the report applies to all the 1,000 cameras. So my place of supply should be determined as per location of the recipient and not India saying कि मेरे पास 2 cameras है और मैं testing उन 2 पे करा, because my report applies to the entire batch. So that is critical. Just because you're getting goods in India, you have to see whether it is just ancillary for you to provide a service, or is it the actual intent of your service. Another taking it forward, I would like to answer. Let's say if I have there is some goods which are required to be worked upon, and my foreign customer says कि let's say मेरे को एक formulation बनानी है, उसके लिए मेरे को multiple chemicals लेने हैं. There are 2-3 chemicals, 1-2-3 I have to mix and get a new chemical. And my foreign customer says कि okay, look, my foreign customer says कि okay, I will not give you those chemicals. You take those chemicals from some other entity. So this is my paneled supplier, आप इनसे ले लीजिए. Okay, my customer is in Dubai. He says आप US से 3 chemicals procure कर लीजिए और आप फिर इनको mixing कर दीजिए और इसकी जो भी price होगी वो मैं आपको दे दूंगा. So what happens in that case? The goods are being made available, but not by the recipient, but by a third party. So what happens in that case? Goods are being available, made A, providing services to B on goods which have been procured by C. If anyone would like to answer that. Okay, so fairly simple. The goods have to be made available by the recipient of the service. If the goods are coming from somewhere else, the section is very clear. It doesn't give you a scope कि आप उनको recipient से treat करके you'll have to go under section 13 subsection 3. You will be out of this section if the goods are not coming from the recipient. It's a critical point. So we move forward. I hope this section is clear. that you have to look at the intent, whether goods are just for an ancillary or they're just to help you provide the service, or the provision is the actual intent of the or the provision on goods is the actual intent of the service. Okay, we'll move to section. Okay, I think we can, yes. So section 13.8, which talks of location of supplier of services as the place of supply. Fairly simple, 3 cases: a banking and NBFC, or a service of hiring of means of transport up to a period of 1 month. The main point of deliberation here is intermediary services. What are intermediary services? A lot of dispute has gone wrong, but I think fairly settled now. What was happening till now is all your BPOs, your back unit processing, the department was treating them as intermediary services and not allowing you export, and saying that the place of supply is the location of the supply. इसलिए आपको उसके ऊपर refund नहीं मिलेगा. The government came out with the circular in 2021 September and has put down some salient features. I just touch on them because now the issue is fairly settled. The one is that there have to be a minimum of 3 parties in the intermediary services, and there have to be 2 distinct supplies. Let's say if I get a service from, let's say if A is located in US and he gets a contract from B who's located in US, and A then subcontracts it to X who is sitting in India. So there are no 2 distinct suppliers, only a subcontracting. So subcontracting is not an intermediary, the government is clarified. And your intermediary service, so if what is an intermediary service is something like, let's say if A wants to sell to B and X is in between who will help you arrange this supply, maybe on a commission or as an agent. He goes ahead and says, okay, look, I'm acting on behalf of A, you please purchase it from me. So that is an intermediary service. So 3 parties necessarily, and 2 distinct supplies have to be there. मतलब उसको अलग से commission मिलेगा expose के लिए, तभी वो intermediary बनेगा. So fairly settled, not much to discuss because settled now by a 2021 circular 159/15/2021. Fairly settled. I think the disputes are now not active anymore. We'll go back to the previous case. If you remember, हमने बात की थी export of goods or services में place of supply क्या होगा in case supplier and recipient both are in India. हो क्या रहा था, जब मैं goods बाहर export करता था and my supplier and recipient both were in India, my supplier the place of supply would become the location of the recipient, और उस वजह से he would charge me GST. But अगर मेरा जो supplier है वो shipping line let's say नहीं foreign की है, तो he would not charge GST, because if you look at section 13 subsection 9, it says place of supply shall be the place of destination of such goods. So the Indian shipping lines or airlines are becoming uncompetitive. So the government inserted a proviso to section 12 subsection 8 that in case transportation takes place to a place outside India, the place of supply shall be the destination of such goods. So whether your airline or shipping company is inside India or outside India, bought a fair ground, and both are at equal footing, because up till now your Indian shippers were at a disadvantage. In an ODR, it says the place of supply shall be location of the recipient. There's a special treatment for an ODR. So what is an ODR? I'll briefly touch upon it. ODR is online data access and retrieval services. So it is something like a search engine where there is not too much of a human intervention and everything is done online. To give an example, let's say you have your YouTube could be one of them, or Zoom could be one of them. So for provision of services, completely automated. Yes, Ashwini. This proviso was a part of section 12 section 8 to correct this anomaly. It did not override, it just specified that in case place of destination is out, only in case the goods are being taken to a place outside India, your place of supply will not be the location of the recipient, but where the goods are being taken. Only for the limited purpose, the goods are being taken outside India. So the proviso in that sense just created carved out an exception from the general rule in case goods are being taken to a place outside India. And this was done to create a parity between the shippers and airlines which are outside India and shippers and airlines which are within India. So in OEDR, what happens is in an OEDR, what the government says is that if an OEDR is someone who's located outside, the place of supply is location of the recipient. Now it says in case of an OEDR service by a person located in non-taxable territory and received by a non-taxable online recipient is a B2C customer, the supplier located in non-taxable territory shall be liable to pay IGST. What happens to a B2B case? A B2B case, your customer in any case would pay it under RCM, import of services, but is notified under RCM. The question arises, what happens in a B2C case? And how do you track it? Because practically a lot of companies are operating in India. The services are actually being consumed within India, but they're not paying any taxes on it. So the government has notified under said that under section 14 that these OEDR services will have to appoint someone into India who will represent them, and they'll have to pay taxes on them. Practically this section, I know there are a lot of issues which are not being a lot of issues in implementing it because the companies are actually not honoring this section. I had a query from Mayur. It says if a person is in the service of providing online games and games are downloaded anywhere from India, it's hard to trace the location of the game downloaded. Then what is the place of supply? I'll take it separately, Mayur. If you go to section 40, if you go to section 13.12, I have not quoted it with a specific where it gives you various criteria of how to determine, as in where is your IP address, what is your credit card address, what is the address in the form. So there are multiple criteria under section 13 subsection 12, which gives you 5 or 6 parameters. And if any 2 of them are within a particular state, you can assume that that is the location of the recipient. I'll separately touch base with you. I'll drop you those criteria. It was a specific point, so we do not touch it here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Now the critical part. It's already 7:30 and very, very critical. I'll request everyone's attention now. I know the thoda sa place of supply everyone was aware of. This is a critical section. Lot of structuring opportunities, आपके practical issues भी आएंगे which can be resolved. Okay. I'm reading out the section. Fairly simple. I'll request everyone to be attentive. It's a very, very critical section. What happens if I pay IGST instead of CGST, SGST, point 1, or I pay CGST, SGST instead of IGST? I'm reading section 77 of the CGST Act. It says a registered person who has paid central tax and state tax, or as the case may be, central tax or UGST, on a transaction considered by him as intrastate, but is subsequently held to be interstate, shall be refunded the amount of taxes so paid. Okay. Then it says in the manner prescribed during that part, I'll just read the relevant part. So section 2 says a registered person who has paid integrated tax on a transaction considered as interstate, but subsequently held as intrastate, shall not be required to pay any interest on amount of CGST and SGST or CGST and UGST. You have a parallel provision under section 90 where you have paid IGST and you are supposed to pay C plus S. You shall be refunded the IGST and you will be required to pay C plus S without any interest of without any interest in penalty. Same under section 90. Multiple questions. What happens? So I'll start with the government recently came out with a circular. First question. I'll request everyone to participate. What do you mean by subsequently held? हम कैसे करते हैं? Okay, ये order pass हो गया, this has been held. What do you mean by subsequently held? Let's say आज मेरा opinion change हो गया. आज मैंने C plus S करा. 2 साल बाद मेरे को लगा नहीं यार C plus S नहीं होना चाहिए, I होना चाहिए. Can I change it on my own? आज मैं CGST कह दूं, 2 साल बाद या 3 साल बाद बोल दूं नहीं IGST. Is it allowed? Any answers? Anyone like to answer? I think Ayush had answered. Ayush is it to? Yes, Ayush had answered no. Anyone else? Okay, I'll clarify. So the government came out with a circular and they said that subsequently held does not necessarily mean that the department has to do it. आपको खुद भी if there's a change in opinion, you can still apply section 77. There is no bar that the department has to undertake a proceedings to tell you that this is not C plus S, this is I or the other way around. So first point, subsequently held आप खुद भी कर सकते हैं suo motu. आपको डिपार्टमेंट के नोटिस की वेट नहीं करनी. आपको लगता है गलती होगी, आप उसको इमीडिएटली कर लीजिए. Second, this came in 23rd September 2021 को circular आया था. Now the second question is, what happens? How do I file for a refund? 2 years. The law section 54 allows you 2 years for filing a refund. Where do I count for 2 years? जब मैंने C+S गलत पे करा तब से, या जब मुझे पता लगा तब से, या क्योंकि पहले मैं IGST पे करूं तब से, कब मुझे, when do I count the 2 years for refund? So the circular again clarified, whenever you come to know, whenever there's a change, you come to know that it is not IGST plus C plus S, you count 2 years from there. Fairly easy. Another way of adjusting it could be, but उसमें आपको interest penalty का exposure रहेगा. Yes, Ayush has rightly answered. Another way of could be an amendment in the invoice or issuance of a credit note. But in that case, you may have exposure to interest and penalty. If it's a small amount, you may not want to go through the refund process. One may explore this case of issuing a credit note or a B2B amendment. Second question, very important. Can I do an adjustment? आज मेरे पास C plus S पे कर दिया, मुझे I करना था. Okay. I tell the government, लोग पैसा तो आपके पास ही, आप मेरे से लोगे, मैं डबल दूंगा, और फिर आप वापस मेरे को दोगे. You will have to go through the entire process. Can I do a self adjustment? Lalita has said no. Anyone else would like to answer? Can I do a self adjustment? मैंने IGST पे कर दिया, मेरे को C plus S करना था, बोला चलो एक काम करो, बोला छोड़ो, SGST ठीक है, IGST में आधा CGST तो सेम गवर्नमेंट को जाना है, वो तो छोड़ दो, आप SGST ले लो, वो मेरे को बाद में रिफंड कर देना, C plus CGST छोड़ दो. Anyone कोई और ओपिनियन की हाफ कर लेते हैं, हाफ एडजस्ट कर लेते हैं, हाफ रिफंड ले लेते हैं. So okay, so there are two cases on it, two High Court judgments on this. The first one was a Kerala High Court judgment and the second one was a Jharkhand High Court judgment. The Kerala High Court judgment basically was some goods were seized, intercepted, and they said कि आप इसमें I plus IGST pay करो. But this guy paid C plus S and he said मैं goods release कर दो. So the government said no, will not release the goods. आप पहले इसमें C plus S pay करो. So he approached the Kerala High Court and the Kerala High Court said कि yes, you could simply do an adjustment. You release his goods, you follow section 77, and if you go to the rules also talk about an adjustment. So you please adjust his amount. A similar question, this case was Saji S versus Commissioner of State GST. The second case, again in the High Court of Jharkhand, Shri Nanak Ferro Alloys Private Limited versus Union of India, where what happened was the assessee had paid 41 lakhs of tax as C plus S instead of IGST. So he was issued a notice. So he went that there should be no notice and he approached the High Court. The High Court, so he made a prayer that you please allow me an adjustment. You allow me an adjustment when the money is with you, even on an equitable basis. Because see, आज let's say अगर ये पिछले 5 साल या 10 साल बाद आपको पता लगता है, it will be a very substantial number, right? It could run into crores and it's not easy to arrange those funds, right? तो आप मेरे को, it's not easy कि आप पहले पे करो फिर आप पैसा वापस ले लेना. So he actually made this prayer, but then he withdrew this prayer, and he said that okay, I'll pay and then I'll take a refund. And so the Jharkhand High Court specifically said that we are not answering this question whether you can adjust or not. But that being the case, as on date, you have only one judgment, Kerala High Court judgment in case of Saji. Yes, Jharkhand and Shri Nanak Ferro Alloys had not answered the question. If you go by Kerala High Court, you can adjust, and even on an equitable basis, you know, it's easier said than done. A small amount, absolutely, one could say, okay, you know, rather than litigate, I'll simply pay and then take a refund. But मान लीजिए आपको पिछले 5 साल बाद का पूरा GST आपको बोलेगा फिर से पे करो, so it becomes a problem. So while the section talks absolutely कि आप पे करो refund लो, but on a legal basis, to my mind also on a legal basis, one could approach the higher judicial forum for a clarity. But after this judgment, what has also happened is department ने circular issue कर दिया है, and that circular specifically says कि आप पहले पे करें फिर refund लें. So, but circulars are not binding on taxpayers. But we'll have to see how does the court rule. Okay. So that is one. Keep adjustment. So we covered subsequently health क्या है और adjustment हो सकती है कि नहीं. अच्छा एक और question. Okay. मैंने C plus S पे करा, इसमें दो तरीके से गलती हो सकती है. ओके, हाउ डू यू डिटरमिन? इफ यू गो बैक टू ओरिजिनल सेक्शन 8 सेक्शन 7, अगर आपको लोकेशन ऑफ सप्लायर एंड प्लेस ऑफ सप्लायर, दो क्राइटेरिया हैं, या तो आपने प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई में गलती कर दी या आपने लोकेशन ऑफ सप्लायर में गलती कर दी. इससे लोकेशन ऑफ सप्लायर में कैसे गलती कर दी? मेरे को दिल्ली जीएसटी से इनवॉइस रेज करना था, मैंने गुड़गांव से कर दिया. ओके, what happens in that case? Can I still take advantage of section 77? Can I take advantage of section 77 कि मेरा दिल्ली जीएसटीएन है, उसने मेरा, लेट्स पुट एन एग्जांपल. ओके, मेरा एक दिल्ली का जीएसटीएन है और मेरा एक हरियाणा का जीएसटीएन है. मेरा प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई हरियाणा है, इसमें कोई डाउट नहीं. मैंने इनवॉइसिंग करनी थी हरियाणा से C+S, मैंने गलती से दिल्ली से आईजीएसटी कर दिया. ओके, so what can you do? Can you take advantage? Can you take shelter under section 77? Anyone? Okay, so this question right now is open. No one, there are no judicial precedents on this, but to my mind there could be multiple ways. So one practical way could be that money has actually accrued to Haryana where it was supposed to go. So on a broader legal principle, you're not required to again pay it on a broader legal principle, because ultimately money has gone to Haryana. But if you look at section 77, literally the problem which is a registered person who has paid central or state tax on a transaction which is considered as intrastate but subsequently held to be an interstate. But the transaction has to be there. जिस केस जो हम केस कर रहे हैं जिसमें आपका प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई हरियाणा है और आपने बिलिंग दिल्ली से कर दी हरियाणा की जगह, वो ट्रांजैक्शन है ही नहीं दिल्ली के लिए. जो ट्रांजैक्शन दिल्ली के लिए है ही नहीं, तो सब्सिक्वेंटली भी इट इज नॉट हेल्ड एज इंट्रास्टेट फॉर हिम. दैट ट्रांजैक्शन वाज ट्रीटेड एज इंट्रास्टेट बाय दिल्ली, बट इट इज नॉट द केस कि सब्सिक्वेंटली उसके लिए इंट्रास्टेट होगी. तो स्ट्रिक्टली स्पीकिंग सेक्शन 77 इन टू माय माइंड शुड नॉट अप्लाई. दिस ओनली अप्लाइज इन अ केस वेयर योर प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई इज नॉट डिटरमिन्ड. अगर आप गलत GSTN से बिलिंग कर दो तो you, to my mind, you cannot take, literally reading, you cannot take advantage of section 77. Yes, on a broader principle, one can say कि money has gone to the right government, so there is no need for making a dual recovery. But strictly speaking, by section 77, to my mind, you cannot take a shelter. Anyone, any queries? I hope it is clear. Okay, so we'll move on to the last topic for the day, which is mixed and composite supply. So some principles of a mixed and composite supply. Okay, first of all, every supply. Okay, why it is important? First, what two mixed and composite supply are, and why it is important, because they help you determine what a supply is actually. Every supply is a separate supply, right? आप एक economic viewpoint से एक supply, जैसे for example, let's say if I'm providing consulting services, it's a separate supply altogether. It's a separate distinct supply. Every supply has multiple essential features or characters to it. Okay, there are two things which should not have. Two things which are tried to be avoided. A single supply should not be split. Multiple supply should not be bundled. मैं एक बार फिर से रिपीट करता हूँ. अगर कोई एक सप्लाई मार्केट में है, सिंगल सप्लाई है, इट शुड नॉट बी स्प्लिट, लेकिन और इट शुड नॉट बी आर्टिफिशियली स्प्लिट. और अगर देयर आर मल्टीपल सप्लाई, इट शुड नॉट बी आर्टिफिशियली बंडल्ड. ओके, आई एम अ CA, आई इशू ऑडिट रिपोर्ट. ओके, उसमें पेपर भी साथ में ही जाते हैं और सर्विसेज भी साथ में ही जाती है. मान लीजिए कंसल्टिंग पे 18% है, पेपर पे 5% है, and instead of raising an invoice of 1,000 rupees, I do paper 800, services 200. I am artificially splitting audit service, so this is not allowed. Another example could be, let's say I sell an item which is at 5%, okay, and I sell an item which is at 18%. मैं उनकी सिंगल प्राइस करके कॉम्बो प्राइस कर देता हूँ, मैं 5% लगा देता हूँ. I cannot artificially bundle also, I cannot artificially split also. ये दो चीजें अवॉइड करने के लिए सिर्फ आपका मिक्स और कॉम्प्लेक्स सप्लाई का कंसेप्ट है. So a composite supply, okay, What is a composite supply? Composite supply means a supply by a taxable person to a recipient consisting of two or more taxable supplies, okay, or combination thereof, which are naturally bundled, one of which is a principal supply. So like I said, her supply mean there are multiple components. I'll give you an example. Let's say I am a broadband company. मैं आपको ब्रॉडबैंड सर्विसेज देता हूँ और साथ में कहता हूँ आपको जितने का भी इनवॉइस है मैं आपके घर से इनवॉइस कलेक्ट करवा के आपको मनी पे करता हूँ. आपको मतलब you don't have to come to my office. I'll send someone to collect the money. So if you look, there are multiple characteristics or multiple features to the supply. One is the broadband. The second one is your collection services, जहाँ पे मैं आपका money collect करने जा रहा हूँ. But this collection of money is only ancillary to my principal supply. The principal supply continues to be your broadband supply. So this is a composite supply. You cannot artificially split it also to say कि there are two separate supplies. कि मैं money collection की अलग service दे रहा हूँ, broadband की अलग दे रहा हूँ. So you cannot artificially split it also. In case of a composite supply, coming back to our case of a broadband service, your tax rate is determined as per your principal supply. Let's assume money collection is at a 5% GST, broadband is at 18%. You'll have to pay 18%. You cannot artificially split to say कि money collection अलग है, ये अलग है, because from an economic viewpoint, it's a single supply with broadband. So this is a composite supply basically. So you look at a supply, आप उसके various elements देखो, सारे elements if they're naturally bundled. For example, I'll give you an example. You book a flight ticket from Delhi to Mumbai. उसमें आपने साथ में refreshments book करी. So that sandwich which you book is actually a part of your flight fare, right? It is only ancillary to that supply. You cannot now artificially split के ticket में 5,000 रुपए, 2,000 रुपए का sandwich, 3,000 रुपए की flight. वो artificial split हो गया. From an economic viewpoint, it's only flight fare. तो इसलिए आप उसको flight fare की तरह ही treat करें. Another question. Okay, it says a composite supply means supply made by a taxable person consisting of two or more taxable supplies. The question is what happens if there is an exempt supply? One double here in case of K-side technologies, it said that in case there are exempt supplies, this section will not apply. But what does it mean by an exempt or taxable supply? To my mind, is something which is completely out of GST. Abhi, now this is fairly settled. For example, your healthcare services. Healthcare services you treat it as a composite supply. Of healthcare services you use medicines also, food, stay, and medical care, but you treat it as a composite supply. What it then means by taxable supply, to my mind, is something which is not taxable under that. For example, अगर किसी को alcohol है, liquor for human consumption, आप उसके delivery charges भी हैं उसमें, साथ में alcohol for liquor आप उसको दे रही हैं. तो उसका जो डिलीवरी चार्ज है आप उसको इसमें कंबाइन करके कॉम्पोजिट नहीं कर सकते. तो से कि अब ये सारे का सारा जो मेरा डिलीवरी चार्ज है ये भी अल्कोहल फॉर लिकर कंजम्पशन हो गया, इट इज नॉन जीएसटी. दैट काइंड ऑफ, इफ दैट इज द केस, सो section 2 subsection 30 will not apply to my mind. I'll come to the point. It could be multiple factors, not necessarily the quantum, the amount, the size. There are multiple factors. For example, how do you market a supply? I'll come to that point. How do you determine कि composite है mix? I'll come to this. इसके बाद वाली slide में just come to this. अब mix supply जब आपने economic viewpoint से देखा, there are multiple supplies और उनको artificially combine कर दिया. Okay. In that case, once you combine it, if it is naturally bundled, तो let's put it like this. If there's a supply, every supply will have multiple elements. Okay. Let's say if I talk of a CA, आप audit की बात करें, उसमें पेपर भी है, ट्रांसपोर्टेशन फ्रॉम माय प्लेस टू क्लाइंट प्लेस भी है, कुछ सेंस में मैन पावर सप्लाई भी, इफ आई एम आस्किंग एन आर्टिकल असिस्टेंट टू सिट देयर, कंसल्टिंग भी है. देयर आर मल्टीपल फैक्टर्स टू इट. सो एवरी सप्लाई विल हैव मल्टीपल एलिमेंट्स टू इट. इफ दोस एलिमेंट्स आर नेचुरली बंडल्ड, इट बिकम्स अ कंपोजिट सप्लाई और प्रिंसिपल सप्लाई के साथ उस पे जीएसटी लगा देते हैं. अगर एक सर्विस के अंदर देयर आर मल्टीपल एलिमेंट बट कोई एलिमेंट उसमें आउट ऑफ प्लेस है, ओके, लेट्स से मेरी इस कंसल्टिंग के बीच में देयर इज supply of computers also, the sale of computers भी है, या कोई और सर्विस भी है which is completely unrelated. Okay, for example, actuarial service भी है मेरी audit service के अंदर, not in terms of the project, some separate service, insurance risk assessment service भी है, insurance service भी है. तो वो it is not naturally bundled, और but मैं उसके single price लगा देता हूँ तो it becomes a mixed supply. So mixed supply, one important point is it has to be single supply. आप किसी भी सप्लाई को उठा लीजिए, आप कोई भी सप्लाई का कॉन्ट्रैक्ट उठा लीजिए, आप सारे एलिमेंट्स आइडेंटिफाई कर लो, अगर वो आइडेंटिफाई एक सिंगल नेचुरली बंडल्ड है, बिकम्स अ कॉम्प्लेक्स सप्लाई. अगर वो सारे एलिमेंट्स नेचुरली बंडल्ड नहीं है बट उनको एक सिंगल प्राइस पे बेचा जा रहा है, तो इट बिकम्स अ मिक्स सप्लाई. एंड इन अ मिक्स सप्लाई यू चार्ज जीएसटी एट द हाईएस्ट रेट. Now, before I go to what are some of the critical points you could keep in mind is how do you determine it's a mixed supply or composite? There are multiple factors. How do you market it? How does your consumer perceive it? Is one supply only ancillary to another? Okay, for example, you go to a movie और आप एक 3D मूवी देखने जाते हैं, तो आपको साथ में they give you those 3D glasses, right? You can use them. तो कैन यू से मैंने आपको राइट टू यूज ऑफ 3D ग्लासेस एंड मूवी की टिकट की प्राइस अलग अलग स्प्लिट कर दूं, बट दैट इज नॉट द केस बिकॉज द ग्लासेस यू गेट इज ओनली एंसिलरी टू इट. हाउ इज इट मार्केटेड? फॉर एग्जांपल a bed and breakfast. A bed and breakfast service is typically marketed and also perceived by the customer as an accommodation service. तो आप accommodation के हिसाब से जीएसटी लगाएंगे, उसको सेल एंड फूड एंड बेवरेज के हिसाब से नहीं लगाएंगे. So how it is perceived in the market, that is another criteria. How it is marketed. Is one of the service only ancillary to enjoy the other service? If that is the case, तो जो main service है जिसको आप enjoy करें, that will become your principal supply. Like our 3D movie का example, जहाँ पे आप 3D glasses किसी को देते हैं, not call it a right to use a 3D glass. अब 2-3 पॉइंट है जो मार्केट में जो इश्यूज आजकल आ रहे हैं, like everyone's attention is, can I split the supplies? ठीक है, मान लीजिए मेरे को वो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करना है या मेरे को इंस्टॉलेशन करनी है किसी की, मैंने एसी दिया, साथ में इंस्टॉलेशन सर्विस करी, मैं इंस्टॉलेशन इज एंसिलरी. Can I split the supplier? If I split the supplier, do I charge separate GST? Anyone would like to answer? Let's say मेरे गुड्स थे, मेरे को वर्क्स कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करना था, मैं वर्क्स कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करता 18% पे होता, सीमेंट मेरा 28% पे है, एंड लेट्स से मेरी कोई और सर्विसेज हैं वो 5% पे हैं, तो मैंने स्प्लिट कर दिया, सीमेंट कहीं से ले लिया, वो कहीं से ले लिया. Can I split my supplier? If I split my supplier, can I then say कि अब supplier split हो गया, it is not a composite supply? Of a single supply, can I split the suppliers? Anyone would like to answer? I'll take this one. So, multiple judgments. Indian jurisprudence, they are saying कि अगर आपकी cross breach है, okay, if there is a cross breach clause, उस केस में आप even if you split a supplier, you will still be taken as a composite supply. जो English jurisprudence है या UK VAT के अंदर जो cases है, they treat it separately. Indian jurisprudence is also under conflict. It is not yet decided. कि अगर आप आर्टिफिशियली इंस्टेड ऑफ स्प्लिटिंग द सप्लाई आप 2 सप्लायर्स ही ले करा, तो आपने वही कि आपने आर्टिफिशियल स्प्लिट करा, बट फ्रॉम अ सिंगल पर्सन आपने 2 पर्सन्स कर दी. सो द इंडियन जुरिस्प्रूडेंस इज स्टिल डिबेटिंग कि क्या होना चाहिए. टू माय माइंड, इफ यू स्प्लिट द सप्लायर एंड देयर इज नो व्हाट डू यू से, देयर इज नो collision among them, then in that case it should be allowed as a separate supplier. This is to my mind. सेकेंड है, मान लीजिए आपने एक किसी को मार्केट करा कि 40,000 में पूरा कंप्यूटर ले जाओ, आपने अब उसमें मिक्स सप्लाई, क्योंकि उसमें प्रिंटर भी है, मॉनिटर भी है, कीबोर्ड भी है, माउस भी है, माउस पैड भी है और टेबल लैंप भी है, पूरा ऑफिस सेटअप उसमें 50,000 या 40,000 में ले जाओ. इट इज बीइंग मार्केटेड लाइक दिस. और जब आपने इनवॉइस रेज करा तो अपने इनवॉइस में हर लाइन आइटम का स्प्लिट दे दिया. कैन यू still call it a, will you call it a mixed supply? Will you not call it a mixed supply? To my mind, will not call it a mixed supply because while it is marketed as such, but ultimately test is कि आप invoice कैसे issue कर रहे हैं. That is your test. Now one very important point, a lot of people are, and there are some challenges which is being faced in a promotional item. For example, आप जब 1+1 करते हैं, उस केस में क्या होगा, या फिर आप लेट्स से बाय वन टूथपेस्ट गेट टूथब्रश फ्री, उस केस में क्या होगा, या फिर कोई और, जैसे I'll take 1 by 1. फॉर एग्जांपल आई से बाय 10 shoes get 1 shoe free. ओके, सो देयर इज अ सर्कुलर ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट व्हिच सेज कि द 11th shoe is not free of cost, इट्स की कॉस्ट इनबिल्ट है उन 10 shoes. उस केस में जो आपका 11th shoe है, इट इज ऑफ द सेम टैक्स रेट एंड इट इज द सेम एज द अदर 10 shoes, so your tax rate will continue to be the same as the other 10 shoes. Now let's take of an example. एक डीलर को आप क्वांटिटी इंसेंटिव देते हैं, उसे कहते हैं buy 10 shoes and get a AC free. उस केस में I like to ask the participants, what do you think, what will be the case? वो जो AC जा रहा है, AC 28% पे है, मान लीजिए वो शूज आपके 12% पे हैं, so what is the rate you will apply? if anyone would like to answer that. क्वांटिटी इंसेंटिव स्कीम है जहां पे आप अपने डीलर को कह रहे हैं कि आप 1000 में से बॉक्सेस ले लीजिए और मैं आपको एसी फ्री में दे दूँ. To my mind, it is going to be a mixed supply. You will have to see कि वो AC free कब दे रहे हैं. See, एक तो है कि आपने से कहा मेरे से आज 1000 बॉक्सेस लीजिए और मैं आपको immediately एक AC free दे दूंगा. उस केस में it's a mixed supply. But let's say if I give you an offer कि आप मेरे से over a period of 6 months 1000 बॉक्सेस ले लीजिए और मैं आपको AC free दे दूंगा. To my mind, in that case, the AC is free of cost. The reason being कि जो इनिशियल केस था जहाँ पे आपने 1000 बॉक्सेस एसी फ्री लिया, वहां पे दैट सर्कुलर विल अप्लाई कि आपकी एसी की कॉस्ट 1000 बॉक्सेस में बिल्ट इन है. बट व्हेन यू टॉक ऑफ अ केस जहाँ पे यू से कि आप 3 महीने में 1000 बॉक्सेस ले लीजिए और आपको एसी फ्री मिलेगा, उस केस में यू मे नॉट बाय 1000 बॉक्सेस बट मे प्राइस ऑफ बॉक्स रिमेन्स द सेम. तो एसी इन दैट केस इज फ्री टू माय माइंड बिकॉज आपने एसी की प्राइस तो इन एनी केस उसके अंदर फैक्टरिंग नहीं करी. पर अगर आपने फैक्टरिंग की होती है प्राइसेस वुड हैव डिफर्ड in case you would have crossed 1000 units or not. So to my mind, that is a case where it's a free of cost supply, or AC is a free of cost supply, there will be no ITC. But in a case where you sell goods, you give something free along with the tax invoice only, in that case it will be a mixed supply to my mind. I think that's all. Any questions? I think we are already running short on time. So any questions anyone would like to ask? Place of supply, mixed supply, composite supply. The floor is open. I have Ayush. Please go ahead.
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. Sir, मेरा केस एक मैंने जो आपसे डिस्कस किया था काउंटर सेल के रिगार्डिंग, वो केस सर ये था कि बेसिकली मैं एक ऐसा बिजनेसमैन हूँ जो कंज्यूमर गुड्स बेचते हैं. अब वो 50,000 से अबव अगर मुझसे कोई कंज्यूमर लेकर के जाता है फॉर इट्स पर्सनल इफेक्ट फ्रॉम माय काउंटर सेल, नॉट इंटर स्टेट ओनली इंट्रा स्टेट, तो उस केस में सर मेरी लायबिलिटी है ई-वे बिल जनरेट करने की या नहीं सर?
Personal effect, I'll double check. I think I'll check 138. I think there's an exception to personal and household effects. I'll double check. I think as far as I recall, it is for used household goods. If it is a new good, if it's a
yes,
new
sir,
good,
used personal and household effects उसमें लिखा हुआ है. नोटिफिकेशन नंबर 27/2017 जो हमारा ई-वे बिल का है सर.
But if you are buying a new, for example, I go to a AC shop and I buy AC, so even if I want to use it, हाँ, वो अगर आपका I understand that is something what we are talking, उसमें ई-वे बिल बनेगा. वो talks of used personal effect is something अगर मैं अपना घर एक जगह से दूसरी जगह शिफ्ट कर रहा हूँ और उस केस में जो मेरे used items जब जा रहे हैं उस केस में ई-वे बिल नहीं बनेगा. But if you are selling a new AC to someone, so in that case to my mind आपका ई-वे बिल.
Okay sir, okay, thank you sir.
Anyone else would like to ask anything? I think then Sumit ji, over to you. Sumit ji.
Yes, Anuj ji, just a minute.
Sir, can I ask more question?
Yes, please.
Please, Ayush.
Sir, in case of hotel, I had asked you कि CORS उसमें हम लोग चार्ज करते हैं प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई होटल की बिल्डिंग ही हमेशा. बट देयर इज अ केस मेरे सामने आया हुआ है कि उसमें दिल्ली से कोई यूपी में स्टे करने आया और उसने अपना IGST दिया, कंपनी का डायरेक्टर रहने आया, उसने बिजनेस पर्पस के लिए अपना IGST नंबर दिया और उन्होंने IGST इनवॉइस काटा, बट उसमें C और S चार्ज किया. एंड एट द टाइम ऑफ फाइलिंग ऑफ द रिटर्न उसमें प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई यूपी दिखा करके C और S पे 07 दिल्ली का कोड एक्सेप्ट कर रहा. तो वहां उन केस में सर उनके 2A में अगर शो कर रहा है तो ITC लेने में कोई प्रॉब्लम सर?
See, okay. If you can, आपने कहा उन्होंने उनका 2A में C उन्होंने इनवॉइस तो इशू करा IGST का है?
नहीं सर, इनवॉइस जो उन्होंने जनरेट किया है जो B2B इनवॉइस है उसमें GST नंबर तो इंटर स्टेट है, बट उन्होंने बिल में चार्ज किया C+S.
Okay.
अब दिस इज अ केस जब पोर्टल पे हम करेंगे तो वहां पे एरर आएगा, बट आई हैड मेड अ करेक्शन कि वहां पे प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई लिख कर आता है. अगर आप उसको टिक कर देते हैं तो फिर वो C और S को एक्सेप्ट करता है इन केस ऑफ B2B इंटर स्टेट GST नंबर.
राइट.
तो सर उस केस में हम वहां पे क्लेम कर सकते हैं ITC?
दिल्ली के अंदर कह रहे हो ना आप?
हाँ सर.
हाँ, सी दिल्ली में लीगली तो आप C का कर सकते हो, S का तो नहीं कर पाओगे बिकॉज वो एक्ट ही अलग है. बट अभी प्रॉब्लम उसमें प्रैक्टिकल ये है कि डिपार्टमेंट इज नॉट अग्रीइंग टू इट। जब आप अपने टू बी जो भी आपके दिल्ली के बिजनेस में नेगरावन के टू बी खोलेंगे तो उसमें इनएलिजिबल क्रेडिट में स्पेसिफिकली एक शीट में लिख के आएगा कि प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई इज इन अ डिफरेंट स्टेट एंड इट विल से इट्स एन इनएलिजिबल क्रेडिट। तो लीगली स्पीकिंग तो आपको मिलना चाहिए, एटलीस्ट सीजीएसटी का तो मिलना चाहिए, पर वो प्रैक्टिकल इशू है, बिकॉज अगर आप लेंगे तो आपको डिपार्टमेंटल नोटिस आएंगे। तो लीगली आई एम विद यू, आप ले सकते हो, बट प्रैक्टिकल आपको चैलेंजेस उसमें बहुत हैं।
ओके, और वन मोर थिंग सर, जो आपने केस बताया था बाहर का, उसमें अगर मैं यहाँ बैठ करके दुबई के क्लाइंट को अपने कोई सर्विस दे रहा हूँ, तो वो मैं अपना एलयूटी फाइल करके जीरो रेटेड सर्विस में कर सकते हैं कि नहीं सर उसको?
हाँ राइट, डिपेंडिंग ऑन योर सर्विस, अगर कोई कंसल्टिंग सर्विस है तो आप कर सकते
अच्छा, और सर जो आपने क्रॉस चार्ज बताया आईएसडी, आई गॉट इट कि उसका हम कर सकते हैं, बट जो आपने क्रॉस चार्ज का कॉन्सेप्ट बताया था कि हमारा पीओ आया था मुंबई से और हमने सर्विस दी अपनी हरियाणा में, उसको सर एक बार इलेबोरेट कर दीजिए, क्रॉस चार्ज मैं कॉन्सेप्ट नहीं समझ पाया था।
ओके, व्हाट आई वाज सेइंग इज डिवाइस पे सेपरेटली वे आयुष कनेक्ट कर लेंगे। माय ओनली पॉइंट वाज कि अगर सर्विसेज अल्टीमेटली हरियाणा कंज्यूम हुई हैं तो हरियाणा के पास रेवेन्यू आना चाहिए। अगर बॉम्बे ने बिलिंग करके वो इनपुट ले लिया, राइट, अगर बॉम्बे ने इनवॉइस लेके वो इनपुट ले लिया बट वो सर्विसेज उसने यूज नहीं करी, राइट, तो in any case it will have to pass on that revenue because Haryana had actually used those services, so Bombay will have to pass on that credit to Haryana. वो सर्विसेज अल्टीमेटली हरियाणा कंज्यूमर्स को रेवेन्यू हैज टू कम टू हरियाणा, अदरवाइज आपका वो लूप क्लोज नहीं होगा।
हाँ, कॉन्सेप्चुअली तो सर यही होना चाहिए, बट मुंबई जब उसको पास ऑन करेगा थ्रू क्रेडिट नोट वगैरह करेगा या कैसे करेगा सर?
वो टैक्स इनवॉइस रेज करेगा, जैसे आप स्टॉक ट्रांसफर ऑफ गुड्स करते हो वैसे आप इसको स्टॉक ट्रांसफर सर्विसेज मानेंगे।
बट सर आई हैड मेड अ सर्विस टू, जो मैंने सर्विस दी है वो मेरी स्टॉक ऑडिट की ऑडिटिंग सर्विस है। मुंबई वाला जो मेरा डीलर है, ही हैज नॉट रजिस्टर्ड एज अ कंसल्टेंट पार्ट, तो फिर वो कंसल्टेंसी के
एक बार इसको सेपरेटली लेते हैं आयुष। मैं बॉम्बे आई टॉक ऑफ कस्टमर रजिस्टर्ड, वो अदरवाइज
ओके सर, ओके सर,
अभी इट्स ऑलरेडी 8, तो ओवर टू यू सुमित जी।
ओके, थैंक यू सर।
Yes, Anuj ji, thank you so much for your wonderful session. Ayush bhai, if you have any query, we will connect to you personally for this.
Okay sir,
And thanks to all participants for wonderful interaction and making this session grateful. And thank you, Anuj ji, for your wonderful time.
Thank you.
And I hope PPT will be shared to each one. Anuj ji मुझे share कर देंगे, मैं आप लोगों को share कर दूंगा, and recording also. So thank you, Anuj ji, one more time for your great time with us. Thank you to each one.
Thank you. Thank you.